Welcome into the Up and Under Podcast, the show dedicated to true basketball fans, giving you unfiltered intellectual takes on the game we all love. If you like what you hear, consider subscribing to the show here on YouTube or wherever you can find a podcast. I'm your host, Hani. Join with me, as always, it's Zeeshan.
Yo.
All right, man. So now that we've kind of been like about a month or two into the regular season, you know, there's been a lot of good things happening in the league. You know, obviously the in-season tournament has definitely been a topic of conversation, I would say. There's also been a lot of great games happening. You know, in all honesty, like the season has been pretty exciting for the most part. And I think the biggest thing that we wanted to kind of highlight was the fact that there's a lot of teams that have really surprised us coming out of the gate to start the season. And this doesn't usually happen. Well, I'll say this. It does happen, but not with the amount of teams that were actually really popping off right now. And I think that's something we really wanted to come and discuss.
And I think it's an extension of what we talked about with the parity and the talent level now across the league where, I mean, you've always had bad teams in the league and you have bad teams in the league now, but the difference is that there's so much talent around the league that even the bad teams have a bunch of talent. And so when we talk about surprising teams and also disappointing teams, we have to keep in mind that just because a team is disappointing or just because a team is surprisingly good, this could really turn around by the end of the season. You know, things could be completely flipped just because of how good everyone across the league is now.
Yeah, case in point, the Utah Jazz from last year would be a perfect example of that. But yeah, just like Zeeshan said, in this episode, we're going to be breaking down the most surprising teams and the most disappointing teams so far to start the season.
So let's start off with the surprising teams. Number one, we have to talk about the Orlando Magic. Now, the Orlando Magic are currently the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference and own the best defense in the league. Offensively, they're still not great. They're still pretty bad. But I think the main thing for the Orlando Magic is just the vision in terms of the future of what they want to do. And I think Jeff Weltman has executed his 6'4" and above plan pretty well so far.
Wonder where he got that idea from.
You look at across their rotation, essentially besides I think Cole Anthony, everyone else is 6'4" and above. So you're talking about, it's no wonder why they would have a top 5 defense in the league. I think the young players seem to be kind of turning that corner, developing as they go along in their careers. With the backcourt, for example, you know, defensive-minded guys like Jalen Suggs and Gary Harris really start the defense at the point of attack. And then you have big, rangy forwards like Franz Wagner and a Paolo Banchero, who, I mean, aren't necessarily the best defenders, but just because of the length that they have, the strength, you know, you have a Wendell Carter Jr. in the middle, Mo Wagner, who aren't necessarily great defenders. Well, Mo Wagner. Wendell Carter Jr. has shown that he can be a pretty good defender in his own right. But it's no wonder why we see a top 5 defense, Jonathan Isaac coming off the bench. And then they've also kind of gone better on the offensive end, at least at balancing it out a bit more. You know, when you have off the bench, you have offensive-minded guys like Markelle Fultz, like Cole Anthony. Cole Anthony himself has been pretty good this season. You know, there were criticisms of him, I think, prior to this season of him just being a shot chucker, not really contributing much to winning basketball. But this season, he's been really good for them. He's playing much more efficient basketball, and he seems to be turning that corner in his NBA career. So I think this is a mesh of things starting to turn around for the Orlando Magic. Now, the question is whether they're actually this good and whether they will end up being this good by the end of the season. In my opinion, I don't see it, but at least if you're an Orlando Magic fan, you can kind of see the growth and the potential of what this team could be with the right draft picks, with the right, trades in the future.
Yeah, and I think that for the Orlando Magic, I think that's all they were looking to see out of this season was just growth, just improvement. And you'll hear us talk about this with other teams when we talk about the disappointing teams. It's sort of like you need to see that signs of growth, that signs of improvement. And with the Magic, you clearly see it. Now you can see the collection of young talent. They clearly have 2 stars in Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero they can build around. They're surrounding them with good complementary pieces. Defensively, they're already a very good defensive team with the length that they've, and the size that they have on their roster. And then now you see the complementary pieces. Jalen Suggs is really coming into his own. You know, you have guys like Cole Anthony, who you just mentioned, is also coming into form. Like, so now you have these guys On top of the fact that like all these guys are young, you have so much cap flexibility in the future, multiple draft picks. The Orlando Magic are, realistically, if the trend keeps going the way it's going, they could be a very good team in the next few years. So speaking of another up and coming team, a team that honestly nobody really expected them to be up here, but yeah, the Minnesota Timberwolves have been a very surprising team to start the season. Currently, they are at the time of recording, they are first in the Western Conference with a 10-3 record, 16th in offensive rating, but second in defensive rating. And I think the story has to start with Anthony Edwards. We saw him with USA Basketball in the FIBA tournament, how good he was, even at the end of last season, becoming an All-Star for the first time. Anthony Edwards is him. He has clearly surpassed Karl Anthony Towns. I mean, he kind of did it last season, but he's now the number one option for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and he's clearly blossoming in that role. He's averaging 26 points a game, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, just being the number one guy, taking over games when he needs to. And this now finally allows Karl Anthony Towns to take a step back and be a secondary option, which he's better suited to being. And where there's not a lot of pressure on him, he can play more freely and, just be able to contribute in a secondary option role. So that's also great. The depth for the Minnesota Timberwolves has also been surprisingly really good. You got veterans like Mike Conley, Slow-Mo, Kyle Anderson. But then you also have some other younger guys like Naz Reid has been tripping about 12 a game. So the Minnesota Timberwolves have been given contribution up and down the roster, actually. But obviously the biggest thing for the Timberwolves has been their defense, where now you can finally see the value of Rudy Gobert and what he can actually bring because he's finally playing defense at a near elite level that he used to be playing at. He's now being a rim protector. He's basically stifling teams where teams won't even attempt to go into the paint. So yeah, the Timberwolves have just been a great defensive team, and offensively, they're being led by their young superstar in Anthony Edwards. The question really is for them is that how long will this last for? But at least it's great to finally see the Timberwolves actually being a competitive team. So yeah, Minnesota, very surprising.
I think with Minnesota, it's just about this is another year under their belt. Last year was a very new and different team, and so for them now to have that year of experience plus a training camp now, I think everyone's just more comfortable in their roles in terms of what this team is expected to be. And now you can see kind of the vision of, why they traded for Rudy Gobert to kind of finish out the building of this team.
They still overpaid for him.
They overpaid, but it's more of a semblance of, what you wanted to see from the Minnesota Timberwolves last year. Karl Anthony Towns, after a slow start of this season, is kind of embracing that secondary spot-up shooter role, spacing the floor alongside Rudy Gobert. And Anthony Edwards has only gotten better off of his FIBA tournament appearance. So, they've gotten a contribution up and down the roster. They're kind of getting more consistent. Nikhil Alexander-Walker's a guy I don't think you mentioned, but he's been good for them as well, continuing off of his FIBA run.
Jaden McDaniels is also really good.
So the Minnesota Timberwolves have a really nice team. It's just about blending it all together. It seems like they're at least starting to figure that out.
Oh, and shout out Chris Finch. Underratedly being a very good coach for the Timberwolves.
Yeah, for sure. Another young team kind of in that same spot, I would say, is the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are currently the 3rd seed in the Western Conference. They are top 10 on both ends of court, 7th in offense and 4th in defense.
The Sam Presti plan is finally coming together, bro.
It is. And I think the future is finally here for the OKC Thunder, who have a great core of young players, obviously with SGA, Jalen Williams, Josh Giddey, and now you finally have Chet Holmgren, who's in his rookie season. So now you're kind of seeing the product come together, all their core pieces now playing together. We obviously know how good SGA is. Jalen Williams kind of functions as, their scorer, that James Harden OKC kind of role. It's kind of the same thing again. Josh Giddey, I think, is one of those guys that just holds it all together, does everything for you on the offensive end.
Bro, he reminds me of Manu Ginobili so much.
Yeah, his outside shot has improved a little bit as well. He's still not a good outside shooter, but at least it's a little bit respectable at least. And I think Chet Holmgren is now the finishing product because he brings for you, where those three guys were the offensive guys. Chet Holmgren, well, he can't play offense as well. He's a really good offensive player, but he's the defense for you now. He finishes the defensive possessions. He's the rim protector. And I think if you look at this Thunder team, the way that Sam Presti has built this Thunder team, all of their core guys are very modern players in terms of all of their guys have a lot of length. Uh, Josh Giddey is a 6'9" point guard essentially. SGA is one of those guys that's 6'5" ish, 6'4", whatever he is. Can get his own shot whenever he wants. And Chet Holmgren is the modern day big man, right? Can shoot from outside on offense and can protect the rim on the defensive end. So I think if you're looking at the OKC Thunder, this is the time for them now. The question is whether this is officially, if they're officially in their new phase of their development, or whether this is just a surge in kind of their developmental stage. I think that's what has to be determined in the next 20 games or so, whether this team is officially in a new era or not.
Yeah, I mean, I got mixed feelings on the Thunder because on one hand, I'm kind of sad because that means Shea is not going anywhere. Love to see him on the Raptors, but that's not happening. But on the other hand, man, the Thunder have just been really fun. They've been a fun team to watch, and they've clearly shown growth and shown improvement. They have a good collection of young talent. Say what you want about Sam Presti and how he handled the whole KD, Harden, and Russell Westbrook situations, but this guy knows how to build a team. He knows how to build winners, and he knows how to scout talent. And clearly, he's done a very good job with the Thunder. On top of that, the Thunder still have so much flexibility with all their draft capital to go out and acquire a superstar player to add on to this core group. So the Thunder might not even be done. They might even be a very active team at the trade deadline, and who knows where they go from there. But yeah, I think Oklahoma City has definitely taken that leap up. Obviously, we know how good Shea is. I love Josh Giddey. I think he's such a great player. Chet Holmgren has definitely surprised me. Obviously, we expected him to be a good player, but I didn't expect him to come out of the gate and just contribute to winning this quickly. And I think he's being an impactful player on both ends of the floor, just spacing the court on the offensive end and just rim protecting on the other end.
Well, I mean, he's been very efficient on both
Exactly.
sides of
The efficiency has also been huge for the Thunder. I think the only thing with me with Chet Holmgren is his will he stay healthy, and that body type, it still scares me. But you know what? If he can do it, all the credit to him. And the Thunder are definitely going to be a very good team heading into the season. Hopefully, if they can make the playoffs, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen, man? But, Sam Presti, you really got to chill scouting your 12-year-olds. I do.
I mean, their war chest is insane, which is, to your point, in terms of making those final trades to, tie up the rest of the roster. Obviously, their bench right now doesn't have much talent, but in terms of trading those picks to get valuable pieces that you can plug into, the rest of your team, I think Sam Presti has a lot of options.
And they have cap space.
Yeah.
They have a lot of cap space, so they can make a lot of moves. So yeah, Oklahoma City definitely has been a very surprising team to start the season. And the final surprising team that we wanted to bring up are the Indiana Pacers. Currently, they are 6th in the Eastern Conference. But honestly, their stats are just hilarious. They're 1st in offensive rating and 28th in defensive rating. They are the offensive juggernaut of the NBA this season. They can generate points in bunches. And, they just came off of scoring 157 points against the Atlanta Hawks. So, yeah, this is a team that's all offense, no defense. But they're so much fun to watch, specifically because of Tyrese Halliburton. He has emerged as one of the best playmakers in basketball. He's averaging 24 points a game, 12 assists per game, 4 rebounds, shooting 46% from 3. He has legitimately become the modern day Steve Nash. He's bigger in size, so he can be a lot more effective on the defensive end. But it's just the playmaking chops, his ability to get his shot, to find openings for his teammates. It's just so much fun to watch. And then not to mention the depth on the Pacers has also been such a huge part of why their offense is so successful. They have 8 players on the roster averaging more than 10 points a game. And, they're putting up points, man. They're a really fun team. They're young. They're up and coming. Now, the defense is still a very big concern. Being that bad on the defensive end is not good. But you know what? If they can outscore their opponents, I guess, at least until the playoffs, it works in the regular season.
I mean, Indiana flew under the radar, I think, for last season and this offseason, but they've done quietly a pretty good job of, taking steps forward in their development.
That's a bonus trade was a low-key, very smart move.
It was a good move for both teams, actually. But we talked about in the offseason, I think one of the underrated things that happened that Indiana did was trading for a guy like Obi Toppin, who's fit in very nicely next to Tyrese Halliburton. And, he's able to showcase more of his offensive chops now, and be a very good pick and roll threat alongside Tyrese Halliburton. Buddy Hield, obviously, in his contract year, has been shooting great. But I think Indiana, up and down the roster, has just been very solid. There's a lot of, I think, potential there. They don't jump out at you in terms of the names that they have, but as evidence, we saw, first in offensive rating, and they're currently in a Eastern Conference playoff spot as of right now. So, I mean, Indiana's quietly done a pretty good job of kind of retooling after, the Paul George era, or the subsequent era after Paul George. But yeah, Indiana's been a nice, surprising team for sure.
Yeah.
Moving on to the most disappointing teams thus far in the NBA season, and we say once again it's still very early on in the NBA season, so a lot of things can change. But for this episode, we will break down some of our most disappointing teams so far, starting off with probably the most disappointing team in the NBA so far, the Memphis Grizzlies. They are a bottom 3 seed in the Western Conference and have been bad on both sides of the ball, especially defensively, where they are a bottom 10-ish, bottom 7-ish defensive
Which is surprising, considering the talent they have defensively.
Exactly. Again, we knew that they would struggle without Ja to at least win games. The hope was that they would be competitive enough without him, but they have completely fallen off without Ja Morant. And I will say, in fairness to the Memphis Grizzlies, they've been very, very injured. They've hit the injury bug very hard. Starting out with Steven Adams, who was ruled out before the season even started, and we saw last season as well that the Memphis Grizzlies rely a lot on Steven Adams to kind of pull this entire team together and make it work, especially rebounding defensive-wise. Also playmaking, being an interior presence for them on both ends of the court. So Steven Adams being ruled out before the season even started was a huge blow to them. Then Brandon Clark, their other, big man, has not even played a game for them yet. And he's very important for them in terms of the energy he brings, rebounding, lob threat. Just kind of his presence on the court. Now Marcus Smart, their new acquisition, who they just got, is out for a number of weeks, and he was supposed to be their, primary playmaker, their primary defender on the perimeter. And so with him now being out, now you have a huge gap on both ends of the court. So the Memphis Grizzlies have not had the best luck. And because of these injuries, now you're forcing everyone else to kind of move up into pecking order in the rotation. Desmond Bane is averaging 25 points, but again, that's not the ideal role for him. He's not supposed to be a number one option on the team. Jaren Jackson has shown that he's not really a guy that can be that number 1/number 2 option, for most games, especially without a, superstar like Ja Morant on the court. Now, Jaren Jackson Jr. is averaging around, around the 20-point mark, but his shooting has not been great. He's shooting, below league average from 3, and that's a huge calling card for him. And especially the fact for Jaren Jackson is when he has to anchor a defense as much as he does, especially now without Marcus Smart. As I talked about, it kind of moves everyone into an uncomfortable spot for them in the rotation. And if you look at, the rest of the roster, the rest of the roster is role players. You're not going to get them to be winning many games when, you have Santi Aldama being expected to score like 20 points a game. That's not a recipe for winning many games, especially with how competitive the league is now. So, like I said, it's not like they've been playing amazingly good teams either. If you look at their schedule, San Antonio, Utah, Portland, they haven't been playing many great teams, but the problem is they're just not a really good team at all either, especially with their injury situation and without Ja Morant in the lineup.
Yeah, I think even us, we expected Memphis to struggle out of the gate until Ja got back, but This, I don't think anyone saw this coming. I mean, especially to me, the defense was the part that we thought, okay, at least they can lean their hat on their defense. But I think, and it's kind of crazy to say, but I think Dylan Brooks said it best. But they basically lost their identity. They lost their identity after losing Dylan Brooks. Like their identity, that whole toughness, the scrappiness, that really all came from Dylan Brooks, who was sort of the emotional leader of that team. And now that he's not there, you can see what impact Dylan Brooks is making for the Houston Rockets. And now the Memphis Grizzlies, they clearly just lack an identity and lack some toughness. Now, yes, you would get that with Marcus Smart, but Marcus Smart just got there. So he's not, he doesn't, I still think of Marcus Smart as more of what the Celtics had. He's more of a Celtics guy than he is a Memphis guy at this point. But ultimately, you expect a team that has two defensive player of the year winners to be a good defensive team. And clearly, this has just been an all-out disaster for the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, again, it's still early. Can they turn it around, especially when Ja gets back? Maybe. But Ja's coming back after, a 25 to 30 game suspension.
I mean, if they make it up, they're still going to be a bottom seed.
Yeah, they're going to be a play-in team at best. So, but, because, again, it's really tough to make up the ground that they've already lost, in this tough stretch. But we'll see what happens with the Memphis Grizzlies. But they definitely been disappointing to start the year. Moving on to the next disappointing team to start the season, I gotta say it's gonna be the Detroit Pistons for me. I think, currently they're last in the Eastern Conference. They're having, they're 25th in offensive rating, 23rd in defensive rating, and I know nobody really, including us, we never expected the Pistons to be in the playoffs or anything like that. But we didn't expect them to continue to be this bad, especially with the talent that they have, with the new coaching system, and the expected growth that we wanted from this team. The fact of the matter is the Pistons have just been horrible. I think I read a stat somewhere, they've only won 4 games in the calendar year of 2023. And
that's crazy.
It is insane. Like the Pistons,
I mean, they were just on an 11-game losing streak. So, they have been absolutely terrible. Anytime you go on a more than an 8-game losing streak, that means you're really, really bad.
Yeah, and again, the Pistons, the biggest problem is that they really just can't score. Despite the fact that Cade Cunningham has been playing relatively well, he's averaging about over 20 a game, but there's really nobody else who can produce consistently on this team, despite having talent. Like Jaden Ivey is in his second year, he's not really producing. Isaiah Stewart not giving you, you're not getting that secondary level of scoring that you would expect to have from some of these guys on this team. And obviously Monty Williams being a first-year head coach with these guys, he has to kind of figure out what these guys do well. And right now, they're not being able to do anything well. They, defensively, they're okay, but when you're not being able to score, it really compounds the issue even more. Now, the good thing about the Pistons is that they're still young. They can still kind of figure it out. There's not really a lot of pressure for them to win this year. But it is kind of disappointing to see that the fact that we haven't seen those signs of improvements like we've seen with other teams like with Orlando, Minnesota, Oklahoma City. We've seen signs of growth. With the Pistons, we haven't seen that despite the talent being there. So they've definitely been disappointing so far.
Yeah. Moving on to the next disappointing team we want to talk about, we have the Los Angeles Clippers. Now,
they're cursed.
They're currently out of the play-in tournament right now in terms of seeding-wise. They're 11th in the Western Conference. But they still are 14th in offensive rating, 6th in defensive rating. So I think the win-loss column kind of, overstates how bad they've been.
Weren't they the first team to get eliminated from the in-season tournament? The Clippers were the first team to get eliminated, to mathematically eliminated. So.
Obviously, they won't be this bad as they are right now, or losing as many games as they are right now. But it's still been a very slow start for them. And it's basically the main issue with them is right now just having trouble integrating a huge presence like James Harden on the team, especially for him since he hasn't played a preseason. So with him not playing preseason, obviously he has to get into shape, kind of get used to playing basketball in the NBA again, and especially on a new team, it's going to be tough. Kawhi Leonard has not been enough of a number one option. He's currently only averaging 21 points a game, and that has a lot to do with him trying to defer to James Harden, trying to integrate everyone together. A lot of their struggles, I think, just boil down to them having a new team with a lot of names trying to figure out their roles. And a lot of, I think, basketball is being played with a lot of my turn, your turn, as in all of their guys kind of get one possession each, which is evidenced by the fact that they're currently ranked 26 in assists. So I mean, like I said, it's the whole integration aspect of, you know, having a new team like that with a lot of personalities, with a lot of names. They're still a really good team if you look at up and down the roster, especially with the talent that they have. But again, with the Clippers, it's always a matter of playoff performance. Can we trust them to get the job done? And deep into the playoffs, can we expect them to finally get that ring? And I mean, looking how it is right now, like championship contenders are not supposed to have the kind of struggles that the LA Clippers continuously have on a yearly basis. So, I mean, the Clippers are definitely a disappointing team right now. Do I think they're going to be this bad, 20 games later? No, they won't. But again, this team is judged based on what it does in May and June.
Yeah, I mean, I stand by my earlier statement. They're cursed. Like, the Clippers are, like, they just can't do anything right. Like, they had a good thing going with Russ, PG, and Kawhi. They're like, yo, let's go get James Harden. And, like, I'm sure Steve Ballmer was in, like, a boardroom somewhere being like, yo, we got to get James Harden, man. We need this guy. We need to sell tickets for that a new arena. All rah-rah, you know how Steve Ballmer is. And they make the move, and it's been a complete disaster, in all honesty. Because it's hard. How do you integrate a player who needs the ball in his hands with three other players that need the ball in their hands to be successful? It's very difficult. Like, I do not envy Ty Lue in his job right now because it is very difficult. And Russell Westbrook, credit to him, has volunteered to come off the bench, which might help things. But clearly, the Clippers need to figure it out. They're way too talented of a team to miss the postseason, which none of us expect them to miss the postseason, but they have to really figure it out, especially before the playoffs, where, like you said, this team is judged based on what they do in April, May, and June. And if they can't figure it out before then, we don't expect them to be going on any deep playoff runs anytime soon. So that's just kind of what it is for the Clippers. There's until further notice, they're still cursed. So that won't change. Finally, the last disappointing team that we wanted to talk about is the Chicago Bulls. Now, they're currently 12th in the Eastern Conference. They're 27th in offensive rating, 16th in defensive rating. It just has not been a good year for the Chicago Bulls, man. Like, they have just come out of the gate limping, and it is just getting worse and worse each and every single game. And I think the problem with the Bulls has kind of just been the same problem it's been for the last 2 seasons. The roster is just poorly constructed. Like, we've now seen enough of DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, and Zach LaVine to know that this core clearly does not fit together, and it just doesn't work. Now, granted, the team would probably be better if they had Lonzo Ball, but unfortunately, injuries have just derailed this guy's career and has derailed what the Chicago Bulls were envisioning themselves to be. But at the end of the day, the Bulls, this core, we had questions about it from the very beginning when they were originally constructed. The fact that none of these guys really space the floor very well. They all need the ball in their hands, and they're all not good defenders. So it just never seemed to work on paper, and clearly the results have reflected that. Now, the saving grace for the Bulls is that they do have a decent defense, but if you can't really score, then the defense doesn't really do you much good. And again, the Bulls are just clearly moving dangerously towards blowing it up, which I think they honestly should. At this point, DeMar DeRozan is on an expiring deal. A lot of teams will be interested in his services because he's a great veteran player, great locker room guy, and teams will be able to take on his expiring contract. So I wouldn't be surprised to see DeMar DeRozan move the trade deadline. But contracts like Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic are harder to move. How do you move guys like that? Now, Zach LaVine has already kind of been in trade rumors recently. But again, he's owed $179 million over the next 4 years. With his injury history, it's very hard to see a legitimate trade come through where the Bulls actually feel like they win, moving that contract. But yeah, it's just been a disastrous start to the season for the Chicago Bulls.
Yeah, man, the Chicago Bulls, after their great start that they had with this new team, unfortunately, after the Lonzo Ball injury, everything has gone downhill for them. And last season showed that they were not a good team at all. And the fact that they have not changed anything yet has been a disappointment for a lot of Bulls fans.
Well, they doubled down. Like they just doubled down on this core, which is like why? They had a chance to move on from Vucevic and they didn't. I think they re-signed him, I think, as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, they just doubled down on this mistake and now they have to kind of live with it. And honestly, the best situation for them is to blow it up and retool, because clearly they don't even have like who's their best young prospect. I can't name who they have as their best young guy coming up in the system. So yeah, it's tough. Yeah, it was Wendell Carter. He was their best guy, and then they traded him away.
Well, I mean, they have some young players like Ayo Dosunmu, like Patrick Williams, I guess.
Maybe.
But I mean, those guys are not, star.
You can't build your future around those guys.
Exactly.
So clearly the Bulls have just doubled down, and it just has not worked. Now, what they do moving forward, who knows? But yeah, the Bulls have been definitely very disappointing to start the season. But with that concludes this week's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the show wherever you can find a podcast. You can find out the Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and of course here on YouTube. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss more great episodes from us in the future. Also, check out our website, upandunderpodcast.com. It's our central hub for the show. It's a place where we write blog posts with every single episode. So if you don't have time to watch the episode, you can read about it on our website. Every episode is posted with the video, audio, and the written version all in one place. And on top of that, follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at _N_podcast, where we post clips and reactions about when the show is coming out, or even when we post clips about, breaking news or other topics that we don't get time to fit into a full episode. So definitely check that out if you haven't already done so. And yeah, man, regular season has been pretty fun. Honestly, pretty mediocre for the Raptor fans, but that's what else is new at this point. It's just kind of what we're used to. But yeah, it's been a fun season so far.
For sure.
The in-season tournament is also underway. The finals are going to be happening in Vegas, so that's going to be very interesting to see how it is. Still not a fan of those courts, though. Those courts are really weird.
Those courts have not been good.
Yeah, they have not been good. But hey, making the NBA some more money, and the games have actually been relatively competitive. So, good for the NBA, I guess. But yeah, we'll see where it goes. It's been a fun season. But with that concludes this episode. We'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.